Ellie Jackson, a dedicated janitor, thought today would be just another shift. But when she finds herself in the middle of a humiliating situation she never saw coming, everything changes. What happens next will leave you absolutely speechless, so stick around, because this story takes a twist you won't believe. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support means everything to us. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The gentle hum of vacuum cleaners echoed through the grand marble halls of the Orchid Regency Hotel. Sunlight poured through towering windows, casting a golden glow over the lavish decor. The air carried a mix of fresh flowers and the faint bite of cleaning chemicals, an invisible reminder of the workers who kept this world-class luxury intact. Pushing her cleaning cart down the hallway with practiced ease, Ellie's hands, worn from years of labor, gripped the handle with quiet strength. Every wrinkle on her face, every gray strand tucked under her simple black headscarf, told the story of a lifetime spent in service. She moved with the precision of experience, every step purposeful, every motion efficient. Beside her, Clara kept pace, at least 15 years younger, her blonde ponytail swaying with each step. Her bright eyes scanned the hallway, always optimistic, always seeing the good in things. "Did you hear about the big event today?" she asked, her voice light but curious. Ellie glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. "What event?" Her tone was more skeptical than interested. "Some charity dinner," Clara explained, folding towels into perfect squares. "They're calling it Dignity and Labor." "Fancy name, huh?" She let out a small chuckle. "Supposed to be about honoring workers like us." Ellie scoffed, shaking her head. "Dignity and labor, huh? Sounds like another excuse for them to pat themselves on the back while we scrub their floors." She fixed her gaze on the carpet ahead. "Remember last year? That so-called appreciation luncheon where they didn't even let us sit at their tables?" Clara sighed, stacking towels on the cart. "Yeah, I remember," she admitted. "But maybe this time it'll be different. I heard a big celebrity is supposed to be there." Ellie snorted. "Big celebrities don't care about people like us. They care about their image, their cameras, their applause. We're just part of the background." Clara glanced at her, concern flickering in her eyes, but she knew Ellie wasn't in the mood for a pep talk. So, in silence, they made their way down the plush red carpet toward their next task, cleaning one of the most expensive rooms in the hotel. The luxury suite at the end of the hall was reserved for high-profile guests, the kind who made headlines. Ellie swiped the keycard, the lock blinked green, and the second she pushed open the door, the stench of spilled alcohol and stale smoke hit them like a wall. "Oh wow," Clara muttered, covering her nose with her sleeve. Her eyes widened as she took in the disaster. "Looks like someone had a wild night." Ellie stepped inside, her expression hardening. The place was a war zone. Confetti was scattered across the floor, empty champagne bottles tipped over on every surface, their contents seeping into the plush white carpet. Pizza boxes and half-eaten food littered the coffee table, crumbs ground deep into the expensive rug. The air was thick with the stench of liquor and old food. "Unbelievable," Ellie muttered, pushing the cart inside, her eyes scanning the mess like a soldier assessing a battlefield. "This is gonna take hours." Clara let out a long, exaggerated whistle. "Yeah, definitely VIP treatment," she said, shaking her head. "Whoever stayed here must think they're royalty." Ellie snorted, already reaching for a trash bag. "Royalty wouldn't leave a mess like this. This is the kind of disaster spoiled kids make." Without another word, they got to work, slipping into their well-rehearsed rhythm of restoring chaos to order. Ellie focused on the bedroom while Clara tackled the kitchen. The sheets on the bed were twisted into a tangled nest, discarded clothes were strewn across the floor. Ellie methodically stripped the bed, her muscles aching with every pull, but she didn't stop. This was her job. This was her life. And then, the door to the suite burst open with a bang, making Clara jump. Ellie turned slowly, her face unreadable, as Richard Hensley, the hotel owner, stormed in. His heavy, purposeful strides filled the room with tension. His sharp gaze darted around, his lips curling in disgust as if he had just stepped into a pigsty. "Is this what you call cleaning?" Hensley's voice rang out, slicing through the room like broken glass. Dressed in a pristine suit, his tie perfectly straight, his shoes polished to perfection, he stood there, cold, calculating, and about to turn Ellie Jackson's world upside down. Ellie Jackson had spent years scrubbing the floors of the Orchid Regency Hotel, keeping its pristine hall spotless, its luxury untouched. She thought today would be just like any other shift, until it wasn't. Until humiliation came crashing down on her in a way she never could have imagined. What happened next? No one saw coming. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support means everything to us. And let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? Mirrors lined the walls of the suite, reflecting the golden glow of the chandeliers, but Hensley's cold stare was locked onto Ellie, sharp and precise, like a hawk zeroing in on its prey. She straightened her back but didn't flinch, her hands continuing to fold the sheet with quiet determination. "Do you hear me, Jackson?" Hensley's voice cut through the room like a whip. "I asked you a question." Ellie kept her gaze down, her voice steady. "We just started cleaning, Mr. Hensley. This is the state it was in when we got here." "Excuses," he sneered, stepping closer. "I'm sick of excuses. Every day, the same thing, slow, sloppy, useless." His eyes flicked toward Clara, softening just a fraction. "Unlike Miss Mitchell here. At least she knows how to act like a professional." Clara's eyes widened, her head shaking quickly. "Sir, Ellie works harder than anyone here. She just needs a little more time." "Silence, Mitchell." Hensley snapped, his tone sharp as shattered glass. "I'm talking to her." He took another step forward, his shadow looming over Ellie. "Look at me, Jackson," he said, his voice low, venomous. Slowly, Ellie lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. Her expression was calm, her jaw tight, her eyes hard as stone. "There it is," Hensley thought, lips curling into a twisted smile. "That defiance. You think you're better than this job, don't you?" he hissed. "Think you're too good to be here?" "No, sir," Ellie said firmly. "I think I deserve to be treated like a human being." For a moment, silence filled the room. Clara glanced between them, her face pale, her breath held. Hensley's eye twitched. His jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might snap. Then, without warning, he grabbed the bucket of filthy mop water from the cleaning cart. Ellie saw the intent in his eyes an instant before it happened. "Let me remind you where you stand," he said, and in one swift motion, he tipped the bucket forward. Cold, dirty water crashed over Ellie's head, soaking her uniform, her skin, her hair. It ran down her face in muddy rivulets, drenching her clothes, pooling at her feet. She stood still. Didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. The silence in the room was deafening. Clara gasped, hands flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Hensley smiled. Wiping his hands like he'd just finished a hard day's work, he turned on his heel. "Clean it up," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "And try to be faster this time." Then, just like that, he strode out of the room. Ellie remained where she stood, water dripping from her sleeves, her heart hammering in her chest. Clara hesitated before stepping forward. "Ellie," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I'm so sorry. I don't." Ellie cut her off, her voice firm, quiet. She lifted her eyes. Clear. Sharp. Like polished steel. She wiped her face with her sleeve, reached for the mop, and said, "I'm fine. Let's clean this room." Clara swallowed hard, her eyes welling with tears, but she nodded. They worked in silence. But something had changed. The shame Hensley had tried to pour over Ellie like dirty water? It didn't stick. Because beneath the damp uniform, beneath the soaked hair and the heavy footsteps on the plush carpet, Ellie wasn't just cleaning anymore. She was burning. Not with humiliation. With something else. Something stronger. Something dangerous. The cold fabric of her uniform clung to her skin as she stepped into the grand marble corridor. Each step felt heavier than the last, her soaked shoes squeaking against the polished floors, leaving faint water stains in her wake. Guests passing by barely spared her a glance, just long enough to wrinkle their noses, their gazes dripping with silent judgment before flicking away. As if she was invisible. As if she was nothing. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Ellie stepped inside. The mirrored walls reflected back a woman soaked to the bone, her uniform stained, her gray hair clinging to her forehead. But her eyes had not changed. She wiped her face with a hand that still smelled of cleaning chemicals and stared herself down. "You're not done yet, Ellie," she whispered to her own reflection, her voice barely above a breath. "You're not done." The elevator descended slowly. Each floor number lit up in agonizing delay. Then, finally, it reached the basement. Cold. Dimly lit. The air thick with mildew, industrial-strength disinfectant, and the faint, lingering scent of sewage. The fluorescent light above flickered, buzzing like an angry fly, casting long, twitching shadows against the concrete walls. The glitz and glamour of the upper floors were gone. This was the bottom. Ellie walked down the narrow corridor, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The housekeeping break room was ahead. But she wasn't going there. Not today. Today, she had a meeting. Her new supervisor. As Hensley had smugly announced before drenching her in filth. Her fingers curled, then uncurled at her sides as she came to a stop in front of a metal door labeled janitorial in faded black letters. For years, this door had meant one thing. The bottom. A place where no one looked. Where no one cared. But today, Ellie Jackson wasn't just walking through it. Today, she was stepping forward with purpose. And whatever happened next, Hensley wouldn't see it coming. Ellie Jackson had spent years working in silence, cleaning up after the elite who never spared her a second glance. But today was different. Today, humiliation had come crashing down like a tidal wave. And what happens next? No one, ***, not even Hensley, could have predicted. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support keeps stories like this alive. And let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? The janitorial closet smelled exactly like what it was, a place where dignity went to die. The stench of bleach clashed with the damp, sour smell of mops that hadn't fully dried. A single exposed light bulb hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly, its flickering glow barely illuminating the room. Against the far wall, old dented lockers stood in a row, the chipped paint peeling like dead skin. Rusty metal shelves held half-empty bottles of cleaning chemicals, rags, and boxes of latex gloves. And in the corner? A single plastic chair, the kind that wobbles if you so much as breathe on it, sat next to a mop bucket crusted with dried soap scum. This was Ellie's new office. And the first person to greet her? About time, a voice drawled from behind. Ellie turned. Cass. The janitorial supervisor. Cass was short, middle-aged, her red hair stringy and pulled back in a lazy ponytail. A permanent scowl seemed etched into her sharp features as she leaned against the doorframe, picking at her fingernails like she had all the time in the world. Her eyes, however, locked onto Ellie like a predator sizing up its next meal. "You're Ellie, huh?" Cass's gaze dragged up and down Ellie's frame, stopping at her damp uniform. A smirk twisted her lips. "Looks like you had a rough morning." Ellie said nothing. She stood tall, her eyes calm but unwavering. Cass pushed off the doorframe, arms crossing over her chest as she circled Ellie like a vulture. "So, you were one of Hensley's special cases, huh?" Her grin widened, like she'd just been handed the juiciest gossip of the week. "Heard you mouthed off to him. Bet you thought you were too good for this place." Her voice dripped with mockery. Well, welcome to the bottom. Ellie's jaw tightened, but she didn't react. She knew people like Cass. People who only felt powerful when they had someone beneath them to push down. Cass wanted a reaction. Ellie wouldn't give her one. Not gonna talk, huh? Cass raised an eyebrow. Smart. That's smart. Best to keep quiet and do your job. She walked over to the shelves, grabbed a mop with a frayed head, and shoved it into Ellie's hands. Here. Your new best friend. Ellie gripped the mop handle, her knuckles turning white. Cass leaned in, close enough that Ellie could smell the faint scent of onions on her breath. Listen up, old lady, she sneered. You're not in housekeeping anymore. Down here, I'm in charge. You mop when I tell you to mop. You scrub when I tell you to scrub. And if you think your 10 years of service mean a damn thing, I'll make sure your shift never ends. You understand me? Ellie met her gaze. Steady. Unshaken. Crystal clear, she said softly, but firmly. Cass blinked, momentarily thrown off. Then she snorted. We'll see how long that attitude lasts. She straightened, waving Ellie away. Now get moving. Women's restroom first, then the men's. And make sure it's spotless. I'll be checking. With that, Cass turned on her heel and stomped away, her heavy boots clacking against the concrete floor. Ellie stood still for a moment. Her grip tightened around the mop. Her chest rose and fell slowly. She stared at the doorway Cass had disappeared through. And then, for the first time that morning, she smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a joyful one. A cold, quiet smile. Let her watch, Ellie thought, her eyes narrowing. She'll see. Ellie rolled her cleaning cart down the narrow basement hall. The pipes lining the walls groaned, the building itself straining under its own weight. She pushed forward. Her mind was quiet. Sharp. The women's restroom was packed. Hotel guests came and went, some too distracted to notice her, others glancing at her with fleeting expressions of pity or disinterest. Ellie didn't care. She dipped her mop into the bucket and started working. Slow. Methodical. Deliberate. She scrubbed each tile like it had personally wronged her. Miss, you missed a spot, a young blonde woman giggled as she walked past, pointing at a clean patch of floor. Her friend laughed as they left. Ellie's gaze followed them. Cold as steel. Then, with slow, controlled movements, she wrung out her mop. And kept cleaning. Not for them. Not for Cass. Not for Hensley. For herself. An hour later, she moved on to the men's restroom. This one was worse. The urinals reeked. The air was thick with humidity, the walls sticky. Paper towels clogged the sinks. Muddy footprints tracked across the tile. Ellie rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She was halfway through scrubbing one of the urinals when the door swung open. Heavy. Deliberate. Footsteps echoed across the tile. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Miss Jackson, came the voice she'd been expecting. Richard Hensley. Her hands tightened around the brush. She didn't turn. Didn't stop working. Look at you, Hensley drawled, his tone smug. Right where you belong. His footsteps drew closer. Ellie kept scrubbing. But inside, something shifted. A quiet storm. A slow burn. And this time, she wasn't going to let it fade. Ellie Jackson had been pushed down, humiliated, and treated like she was nothing. But what they didn't realize, what Richard Hensley didn't see coming, was that Ellie wasn't broken. Not even close. Before we get into it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive. And let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? His footsteps stopped right behind her. Ellie didn't turn. Didn't pause. She could feel the heat of his presence, standing too close, like he owned the air around her. "How's it feel, Jackson?" Hensley's voice was a slow drawl, oozing with mockery. "Bet you missed those nice cozy rooms upstairs, huh?" Ellie kept mopping. Steady. Controlled. Unbothered. "Nothing to say? No smart remarks today?" He chuckled, dark and low. "I thought you'd have learned your place by now." Ellie straightened slowly. Back straight. Shoulders square. Chin lifted. Then, finally, she turned to face him. Her eyes? Like sharpened glass. "Don't you have better places to be, Mr. Hensley?" she asked, her voice as calm as still water. Hensley's smile curled into a snarl. For a second, it looked like he might explode. But instead, he grinned. "You're funny, Jackson," he said, his tone cold, dangerous. "Real funny." His eyes flicked over her face, calculating, measuring. "But I promise you, that mouth of yours, it'll cost you." He turned sharply on his heel, his shoes clicking with each step toward the door. At the threshold, he paused. "I'll be watching, Jackson," he called over his shoulder. "Don't forget that." Then, the door slammed shut. Ellie stood there. Heart pounding. But steady. She dipped her brush back into the bucket. "Watch all you want," she whispered. "You'll see." The heavy scent of bleach burned her nose as she worked. Back and forth. The rhythmic glide of the mop was the only sound in the cold, gray men's restroom. Her hands ached. Her back throbbed. But she pressed on. She had no choice. She wouldn't break. Not for Hensley. Not for Cass. Not for anyone who thought they could stomp her into the ground and walk away laughing. Her wet uniform still clung to her, a reminder of the humiliation she had endured hours earlier. But now it felt like armor. Her movements were precise, purposeful, like she was carving her will into every inch of that floor. Then, footsteps, echoing through the hall outside. Heavy, slow, deliberate. Ellie knew that walk. She'd heard it too many times. Her grip tightened around the mop handle. She didn't look up. Didn't have to. The restroom door creaked open. The air shifted. The temperature didn't change, but the weight of the room did. And then, his voice. "Still here, huh? Richard Hensley." His tone was slick, laced with mock surprise. "Figured you would have quit by now, Jackson. Most of your kind don't last long when the work gets hard." Ellie kept mopping. Back and forth. Back and forth. No reaction. Nothing to feed him. Hensley's shoes clicked against the tiles as he approached. Slow. Predatory. He was circling now. "Come on, Jackson. You had so much to say upstairs," he taunted. "What happened to that big voice of yours, huh?" He laughed, low and sharp. Ellie could feel his eyes on her, watching her every move, like she was an exhibit at a zoo. She hated that feeling, hated the way he loomed. But she didn't stop, didn't pause, didn't flinch. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." Hensley's voice cracked through the room like a whip. Ellie stopped mopping. Slowly, deliberately. She turned. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes? Sharp, unflinching, unbreakable. "What do you want, Mr. Hensley?" she asked, her voice as steady as stone. Hensley's grin widened, teeth bared like a wolf about to bite. "Oh, you're brave now, huh?" he sneered. He stepped forward, too close. Too much cologne. Too much arrogance. Ellie stood her ground. "I'll tell you what I want," he breathed. "I want you to remember where you are, who you're talking to. and just how replaceable you are. His eyes darkened. You're not special, Jackson. You're not important. You're a mop and a bucket. That's all you are. He leaned in closer. Close enough that Ellie could see the faint red veins in his eyes. You think anybody upstairs cares about you, he hissed. Think they care what happens down here. He let out a harsh, ugly laugh. They don't. People like you? You get used up and thrown away. The words dripped with venom. They were meant to cut, to wound, to remind her that she was nothing in his eyes. Ellie didn't move, didn't blink, didn't flinch. Her gaze never wavered. Inside, her rage burned hot and steady. But she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing it. Are you finished, Mr. Hensley? Her voice was quiet, cold, controlled. Hensley's smile faltered. His eyes narrowed. For a second, just a second, it looked like he might lash out. But instead, he stepped back, smoothed his tie, composed himself. You're funny, Jackson, he muttered. Real funny. He turned toward the door, but paused, glanced over his shoulder. Oh, and don't forget to scrub those urinals extra hard, he added, his smirk returning. Wouldn't want our guests thinking we hire lazy help. Then, he was gone. Ellie stood there, still, silent, unbroken. And for the first time all day, she exhaled. Ellie Jackson had been pushed, humiliated, and cast aside. But what they didn't realize was she wasn't broken. She was just getting started. Before we continue, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps bring stories like this to life. Let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? Ellie's breath was slow, measured. Her grip on the mop tightened until her knuckles ached, but she didn't drop it. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, letting the silence settle over her like armor. Her eyes drifted to the mirror. A tired woman stared back, soaked, exhausted, covered in filth. But her gaze, sharp as ever. Wiping her face, she left a streak of dirty water across her cheek. You're not done yet, she whispered. Not yet. Then, a sound. A faint shuffle. Ellie's attention snapped to the row of stalls. Another noise. A soft creak. Her heart pounded as she stepped forward, her grip tightening on the mop handle. Was it Hensley? Had he stayed behind, lurking like a predator? She didn't know what she'd do, but she knew she wouldn't back down. First stall, empty. Second stall, empty. Third stall. She nudged the door open with the mop and froze. A man leaned casually against the stall wall, arms crossed. A gray hoodie. Dark jeans. But this wasn't just any man. This was Sylvester Stallone, the Hollywood legend himself. Ellie's mouth went dry. Her heart skipped a beat. Then another. She blinked, sure she was imagining it. But no. It was him. The chiseled jaw. The rugged features. The calm, piercing gaze that had stared down enemies in every action movie she'd ever seen. Stallone removed one wireless earbud, tilting his head as he looked at her. His eyes were sharp, but kind. He gave her a small nod. Rough day, huh? Ellie opened her mouth, nothing came out. She blinked, then finally found her voice. You were here the whole time? Yeah, Stallone said, stepping out of the stall. He glanced around like he'd just noticed where he was. Needed a quiet place to think. Guess I got more than I bargained for. His gaze locked onto hers. I saw it. All of it. Ellie's heartbeat thundered in her chest. You saw him? Yeah, Stallone nodded. His eyes darkened slightly as he looked toward the door Hensley had walked through. Guy's a real piece of work. Ellie felt a surge of emotions: shock, relief, fear. And something else. Hope. Stallone's expression shifted, something steely settling in his gaze. "This ain't over," he said. "Not by a long shot." Ellie swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you going to do?" Stallone's eyes flicked toward the door. His jaw tightened. Then he smiled. Not a friendly smile. A knowing one. Let's just say. His voice was low, firm. "I've got friends. And guys like him?" He tilted his head slightly. "They always think they're untouchable." Ellie held his gaze. "But I've spent my whole life proving guys like that wrong." Something shifted inside her. The weight of the day didn't feel so heavy anymore. Then, Stallone extended his hand. "Are you with me, Ellie?" She stared at him, her mind racing, her heart steady. Then slowly, she reached out. Shook his hand. Her eyes narrowed with newfound resolve. "Yeah," she said. "I'm with you." And from that moment, everything changed.